Good evening. Welcome. Nice to see a few people in the gallery out here. So I'd like to call to order the regular council meeting of Wednesday, February 6th. It is 7 p.m. and we have an amended agenda. We had one report amended in 10.8 and 10.9 was added. So are there any other amendments to the agenda? All right, so I'll look for a motion to receive the agenda. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And we have two delegations tonight. Our first is Diane Sanford she's the regional coordinator for Salish Sea Nearshore Habitat Recovery Project. Please come up and push the button and we'll be able to, I can tell we can hear it out back there because I can hear it echoing.
There we are.
Yeah, and you can just pull it down a bit towards you. And I think, Jen, I think we need to turn it down just a touch.
Sound
Thanks.
good? A little bit too loud? Okay, great. So I am here to provide information on a project that is ongoing here in Porpoise Bay at this present moment and Sechelt Inlet. I have given you a little bit of supplementary information, but I'm going to give you a very, very brief backgrounder. I have been involved with eelgrass mapping on the Sunshine Coast since 2001. I've been working with the Sea Change Marine Conservation Society. They are a nonprofit organization based out of Victoria area. It worked, good stuff. So the funding that we have is a 4-year funding, which is quite wonderful. And it is from the Coastal Restoration Fund, which is under the Oceans Protection Plan of the federal government. So Sechelt Inlet is one of 4 areas that are involved with this project. And the other areas are Howe Sound, Burrard Inlet, and the Southern Gulf Islands. So this project is to contribute to implementation and development of coastal zone plans, identify restoration priorities, I should say, for our areas that we're involved with, implement the projects, and address threats to marine species located on Canada's coasts. The project for here is 2018. It began last year, and it will end 2022. And so after consultation with the Sechelt Nation, we've had 2 meetings already, and with that, we included as many community as we could, local, federal, and provincial governments and interested groups. And so we were discussing the details of the project, and we were selecting nearshore habitat restoration sites within Sechelt Inlet, prioritizing and drawing on the rich resources we have to collaborate. So the idea of this project is a collaboration. Okay, so here we have the priority. Priority is eelgrass and areas of eelgrass that have been impeded by debris or other things happening. Okay, and so moving into our specific area right now that we're working with Porpoise Bay. So marine debris removal was set as a priority because of the impacts that we have discovered. And so in August of 2018, last summer, we brought in our dive boat, our divers, and produced this map. So these are debris points taken by side scan sonar, lots of them. And debris removal began 15-day dive days, and that was November 6th through to 27th. And I'm just going to flash through. One of the major items was netting. These little guys were caught in that netting in the very short time that it was drawn up from the bottom. We did let them go. And the nets are cut manually because they have to be put into manageable sizes so that they can be hauled up with a small crane that is on our pontoon barge, which has a small crane on it, collective effort. And here we have a pregnant red rock crab. She was entangled in the netting and, of course, released. And some of the things that have come up, I'm going to flash through these quickly. Yes, indeed. And so this is the collective effort. It's a 26-foot aluminum pontoon barge. So they motored over. And it's some of the crew, there's some outboard motors and various things. And so there was a total of 5.23 metric tons, or 11,530 pounds of materials brought up. yeah. And we were a collaborative effort, most definitely. So the District of Sechelt kindly offered the hauling from the government dock at Porpoise Bay to the SCRD landfill. Those totes were donated by House on Pulp and Paper. And so that was the process up to that point, to this point. Next week, we will have the crew coming back to do 4 more days of mapping. So it was basically the southwest side of Porpoise Bay that was mapped for debris. We want to complete the Porpoise Bay area. So I'm just going to really quickly go into eelgrass restoration, which has been going on since 2014. Sea Change Marine Conservation Society has been involved with restoration projects, and these are approximately 20 eelgrass restoration sites in the southern Salish Sea. And then there's been 634 square meters, or meters square, I should say, of transplants in 5 sites in Sechelt Inlet. That's since 2014. 4 sites are considered successful, and the parameters for that are chute density per square meter and area extent. So is the bed expanding, or what's it doing? These are the sites that we have done to this point. So we have East Porpoise Bay, McLean Bay, Tewanek, Lambs Bay, and Mount Richardson. Okay. And just a really quick rundown. So what happens is the dive crew will go and collect the chutes from a donor bed, so they'll find an adjacent healthy bed, and the volunteers will attach these washers to the chutes in order to provide weight to anchor those, so they'll stay in the substrate. At this point, there's some volunteers doing this, and we've had great volunteer collaboration with this. And those chutes are then taken and planted in the substrate. These are done manually by the divers. So this is very labor intensive. They're in clumps of about a dozen. And so what's next? Well, with Sechelt Nation approvals, we'll finish our debris removal in the Porpoise Bay area. We'll replant eelgrass in areas that have been impacted by debris, by the presence of debris, or sunken vessels in Porpoise Bay. We're hoping that in the near future we will be able to expand from just debris to larger vessels, derelict vessels. And we're going to also look at prioritizing other areas in Sechelt Inlet for potential restoration, including debris removal, shoreline, and eelgrass restoration. And there we have what the process has been, excuse me, to this point. We started with the community and local governments and other governments, provincial and federal, getting together and talking about priorities. We came up with over 40 sites. From that, we whittled down to approximately 12 sites, which you see here. And the orange down at the southern tip there is where we're currently working. Okay, and there's one of our final photos. This is a little visitor that came very curiously to check out what our dive crew were doing. So he got a picture before he got placed back where he belongs. And just a thank you once again to the Sechelt Nation, District of Sechelt, Sunshine Coast Regional District, House on Pulp and Paper, all our volunteers, past, present, and future, and of course the businesses that also gave us breaks to help make this happen. So I'm really here now for the remainder of the time just to answer questions.
Thank you. That's really exciting to see what you guys are up to there. So any questions from councillors? Well, they're thinking of, yeah. One of the questions I had in the presentation that you gave to us in our package, I didn't know who was doing this or where the funds were coming from. So that was my question, but you've answered all of those.
Yeah, excellent. That's good. We had Darren Inkster as a representative from council in the last 2 meetings. I am organizing another meeting now for March 22nd. And I've spoken to Ian, but if there is a person that would be interested in coming, I would be more than happy to have that representation. So give that some thought, please. Yeah, it's an exciting project. little disheartening at times to see what's there. But I think because I'm mainly an educator, and that's what I've been doing for many years, it's important that people know about these things, and so you don't just do this as we have been known to do as humans for many, many, many years. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you make sure that our staff have the time of the meeting and location, then we'll put it out to counselors and see who's available to come.
Perfect. That would
Thank
be
you.
wonderful.
Thank you for your time.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for the project.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Our next delegation is Bill Conway. He's the White Cane Week coordinator.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council, and thank you very much for allowing me to speak here tonight. I know after I say my words of wisdom, you will be reading a proclamation that started 75 years ago in April of this year. It was formed and started up by veterans of WW2 to try and improve the rehabilitation services for people with visual impairments. It was called, and is called today, the Canadian Council of the Blind. Today, we have chapters or divisions from coast to coast of Canada and chapters in every single province. In this province, for example, there's 25 chapters with approximately 400 members, and that's our province alone. Today, as announced, I sit as a provincial director and responsible for White Cane Week across the province of British Columbia. This is my third event I've done this at already this week, and I've got 2 more to go. So I know what it's like. Your job is also. 75 years ago, when this was all brought together, the gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen of our armed forces indicated that they wanted strong advocacy, mentorship, and leadership within the provincial, municipal, and federal governments. The advocacy work that the Canadian Council of the Blind has spread coast to coast of this country and from shore to the border. We have taken upon the government many times, and at one time in 2018, the government had to turn the record off who let the dogs out. I say that for a specific reason, because the Canadian government in 2017 thought that they could try and certify my guide dog. Today, the government had to back off because over 1,000 pieces of information was sent to the Canadian government General Standard Branch to deny the Canadian government on certifying guide dogs and service dogs in this country. It is through the efforts of the Canadian Council of the Blind and the guide dog movement and the service dog movement of this country that stopped that government, our government today, from doing this. My dog is internationally certified. I don't need a Canadian government to tell me that my dog is not certified. On another point, other advocacy work we've done, since we are part of the World Blind Union, which has memberships from around the world, put together, and they brought forth a treaty called the American-ish Treaty. That treaty was finally signed by over 25 members of the world leaders. And unfortunately, the last person that signed it was the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Yes, he may not be good to a lot of people, but by him doing that, it enabled 700,000 print-disabled citizens of Canada to have access to printed material in alternative format. That is just some of the work that we have done internationally and nationally. We are active in the Canadian Transportation Authority and agencies, like regulating my dog on a plane, boat, and/or ferry. We also are involved in the CRTC actions, along with the Canadian Revenue Agency. In the province of British Columbia, I'm fighting the government on Bill 17, the Guide Dog and Service Dog Act, which I don't believe in. But that's my battle, and I fight it every day with my puppy and other people of this province. But their four-legged friends at their left side are standing side by side to take on John Horgan and its government. Once again, it'd be the fourth time we've taken on a government in this province. So far, we haven't won, but we haven't lost either, because we're still here. And if I may switch hats just for a sec, Madam Mayor. As president of the Sunshine Coast White Cane Club, which meets here locally at our Seniors Activity Center on a monthly basis, we're hosting an information session on Saturday, February the 9th, here in Trail Bay Mall. I will have some of my own personal technical equipment there that I use personally to make myself more independent and provide solutions to those who ask us on how to live more independently with their visual loss. Today, in this area, we have approximately 75 to 150 visually impaired citizens of the Sunshine Coast. So we're out there. Some of us are seen, and some of us are unseen. But I want you all to remember one thing, Madam Mayor and Council, that the lack of sight is not a lack of vision. I hope to see you this weekend and come and buy one of our 50/50 tickets, so help to support the Canadian Council of Blind BC Yukon Division. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Bill. Before you leave, you mentioned Saturday, February 9th, Trail Bay Mall. What time?
From 10 to 2:30.
10 till 2:30. Thank you.
And the tickets, we have a sale price on our 50/50 tickets.
They're on sale, are they?
Yeah, oh yeah, they're $5. There are 5 tickets for $10. Or you can have one in that small print that says $2 a piece.
All right, any questions by any of the councilors? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, so we have a proclamation, White Cane Week, February 3rd through 9th, 2019. Whereas since 1946, the first full week of February has traditionally been White Cane Week in Canada due to the initiative of the Canadian Council of the Blind, and whereas the objective of White Cane Week is to provide education and awareness of vision loss to British Columbians through a network of special events and hands-on demonstrations throughout the province, and whereas White Cane Week has evolved to reflect the changing situations of the blind community and has begun to emphasize the equal capabilities and talents of people who are blind and partially sighted, and whereas with the province's aging population, all British Columbians need to be better informed about the effects of vision loss and to work towards creating more supportive, inclusive communities, now therefore, I, Darnell Seegers, on behalf of the District of Sechelt Council, do hereby proclaim that February 3rd through 9th, 2019 shall be known as White Cane Week in the District of Sechelt. Thank you. And another proclamation, Darwin Day, February 12th, 2019. Whereas February 12th, 2019 is the anniversary of the birth of Charles Darwin in 1809, and whereas his work has made great contributions to the human understanding of our world and the universe we live in, and whereas that understanding led to and continues to lead to advances in technology, medicine, and philosophy, and those advancements, through the efforts of the women and men of science, have helped to relieve suffering and prolong life, and whereas the anniversary of Darwin's birthday is an appropriate time on which to reflect and celebrate the importance of scientific advancements to all people, now therefore, I, Darnell Seegers, on behalf of the District of Sechelt, do hereby proclaim that February 12th, 2019 shall be known as Darwin Day in the District of Sechelt. So we'll move on to adoption of minutes of the council meeting of Wednesday, January 6th. Motion to adopt, moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Did I say January 16th? What did I say, February 16th? January 16th, yes. All right, all those in favor of adoption? Thank you. Any business arising out of those minutes? Okay, let's move on to the minutes of the Committee of the Whole of January 23rd, 2019. Motion to adopt. Corporate Officer?
Your Worship, before Council considers adoption, staff note a couple of typos, I guess, on page 41. Recommendation number 13 is repeated twice.
Yes.
So we just ask that the numbering be corrected.
Okay. Any other amendments? So I'd look for a motion to adopt as amended. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And then we have the minutes of the Community Investment Program Grant Review Committee of January 4th. Move for adoption. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Thank you. So we're moving into bylaws. So this is the Council Procedure Amendment Bylaw number 568-1. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? And did you want to speak to this? Yes.
Your Worship, the bylaw that's before you was considered by Committee of the Whole at its last meeting, and it was recommended that Council consider giving first, second, and third reading to the bylaw. So it's in front of you for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. So is Council up to giving first, second, and third reading to this amendment as presented? Or this bylaw, sorry, amendment bylaw as presented? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, so let's give it some readings here. So this is bylaw number 568-1, 2019, a bylaw to amend Council Procedure Bylaw number 568, 2018. And I'd look for someone to move first reading. Moved and seconded. All in favor? And second reading. Moved and seconded. All in favor? And we're looking for third reading. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. Yes. So then item 8.2A, this is for adoption. This is Advisory Planning Commission Bylaw number 578. Motion to receive. Moved and seconded. All in favor of receipt? Thank you. And turn over to staff.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. So the bylaw before you, as was discussed on January 16th for the three readings, it's bylaw number 578. It was intended just to update the existing APC bylaw, bring it more in alignment with the legislation. There was a minor amendment as directed by council in the previous meeting to section 4.2. To remove it from saying thou shalt, essentially, to council shall give preference to members with community planning experience. So that change has been made and is reflected in the bylaw, and it's recommended for adoption. Thank you.
So we have a motion in front of us that the Advisory Planning Commission Bylaw number 578, 2019 be adopted. I'd look for someone to move that. Moved and seconded. All in favor? So let's move to the bylaw. I have to find the first page of it. There we go. This is District of Sea Shop Bylaw number 578, 2019, a bylaw to establish an advisory planning commission for the District of Sea Shop. Look for someone to move adoption. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. So we're looking to item 10.1 on page 59. This is West Porpoise Bay Estates Limited revised development permit application. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor of receipt? Thank you. And I'll turn over to staff for a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship, members of council. Back again. So this is a development permit application for West Porpoise Bay Estates Limited. This development, it's 6 buildings, 80 additional apartment units to this strata. It falls under 4 development permit areas. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to focus mainly on DPA 5, which is the steep slopes, and DPA 7, which is the form and character. They were subject to 2 other development permits, and as mentioned in previous application, they had met those requirements, and it isn't really of issue at this stage. So the current zoning is an R4, which allows multi-unit development. A lot of the area surrounding the site is zoned the same way. So I thought I'd change the order and actually start with form and character, because in most of the discussions we haven't actually got there. So what the form and character development permit tries to do is it applies to multi-unit development. It's focused primarily on looking at does it fit with its surroundings? Can it be integrated with what's around it? They're intended not to impose an architecture or style on it, but really to look at are there opportunities to make sure it kind of fits. So the kind of things that we look at is the massing of the buildings related to what's around it, the articulation of the building. So there are a number of things that can happen with multi-use development to make it fit a little better with its surroundings. So we just want to make sure that it's not, glaringly different from what's around it. So it looks at materials. There are some guidelines around sustainability and lighting, as well as outdoor spaces and safety and security, mainly in parking areas. A lot of these kind of developments will have underground parking, and so we look at how that's addressed. This is essentially a rendering of what the development will look like where it sits on the site relative to the area. The developments are between 3 and 4 story. They've got green roofs on all of them, and it's an extension to an existing strata. This is the landscape plan, but it gives you an idea of kind of where the buildings sit on the site. So they're adjacent to an existing strata road. There are 4 buildings that are off the main strata road, 2 of them that sit below. I don't know if everyone's been at the site, but there is an area where you see where the concrete kind of jutment, and that's where the parking comes into the buildings 5 and 6, which sit a little bit lower. The lower end of that site is a 15-meter protected area. It's not showing up on the landscape plan, but that's a protected area, and so there is no vegetation being removed from there. As part of this development, too, they're not doing anything along the shoreline, so there's no other construction down in that area. This is the artist's rendering of what the buildings will look like. This is the side facing the inlet. I'd speak to when in the report when I mentioned about the previous development and it being on stilts. I thought I'd just include a picture. That's what it was talking about. And that's why it was kicking into a height variance requirement, because under the R4, excuse me, the maximum height is 10.5, which essentially gives you a 3-story building. Because of the way it was sitting and the way we measure grade, it would have kicked into to higher than a 10.5. In most cases, it just read as a 2-story from the road, but it fell into kind of above 4-story at the inlet side. So They did go through development variance permit process on 2 occasions, and it wasn't supported. So the application that has come back has provided an opportunity to develop the site without needing any kind of height variance, and so it meant a kind of a different approach to how it is embedded into the slope. This is essentially what the previous one would have looked like from the Strata Road, and I'll go through in more detail of the individual buildings. So starting at the Marine Way Road end of the site, this is building number 10. All of them that you'll see will meet the 10.5. This one reads still as a 2-story from the road across from the existing townhouse, and you can see in the sketch essentially where that sits relative to its neighboring use. And then this is what it will look like from the Strata Road. Some of the things that we will consider in terms of form and character, when we look at a building like this, we look at a variety of materials, and often, depending if they're sitting beside a general low-density residential, we often will encourage a sloped roof or a different kind of roof pattern. This is a much more modern design, and the flat roof actually helps to kind of mitigate the height issue on this. So it fits a lot better on the site than going to a sloped roof. The applicants have done a fair bit of work in rethinking how they've done the elevator shafts, again, to reduce the apparent height on these buildings. Next door to it, building number 9, it is lower along that Strata Road. So the site contours are such that it's not a consistent slope down. So you'll see some of the buildings a little bit lower than others. So building 9 essentially reads as about 1.5 story from the Strata Road. Most of the parking completely underground. So that's what it reads like from the Strata Road. Building number 8 is the one that goes the furthest into the slope because of just the nature of what the slope is doing there. So a fair bit of it is below, and it reads just under a story from the Strata Road. And in buildings 9 and 10, they have a joint access, and they access out to Marine Way. Buildings 7 and 8 will access into the existing Strata Road. So it essentially disappears from the Strata Road. So that's sunk down quite far. And then in building 7, it's very similar to what building 9 looked like. Reads at about 1.5 stories at the road. That's what building 6 looks like. So that's when you're coming in through the main strata area that's the existing road. This gives you a sense of, because sometimes it's hard to read in some of the attachments, of the parking is structured. That area, do I have? That's kind of where the existing concrete area is, and this is an extension for the parking there, and structured parking and surface parking in that area, serving those 2 lower buildings, which do not have underground parking in them. They're 4 stories of residential. They sit much lower at the site. They're not particularly visible from the Strata Road itself. That's how the parking area looks in drawing. That's the entranceway coming in off the existing Strata Road. So in dealing with kind of the massing and the look of this development, the colors and the materials become part of the development permit. They're actually tied to the permit. So they work very well with the existing area, and the green roofs help mitigate the apparent effect of the building. It also helps with the stormwater. So in terms of their alliance with a lot of the form and character, it met quite a few of those guidelines. There are some that would be more challenging just because of the nature of the site. So the biggest issue outstanding on this is really around the hazard DP related to steep slopes. And the DP justification on this type of development permit area is fourfold. It's really to protect the natural environment, it's to protect the property from hazards, it's to protect people from hazards, and it's also to minimize the cost to service and maintain infrastructure in hazard areas. Basically, it is a risk management approach that is taken on this, and the kind of things we look at, and so the kind of information that council needs to consider is in your package. You do have the geotechnical reports, the landslide assessment, some additional information around the site alteration. So it's really a look at, does this sufficiently mitigate enough to go against the policy and the guidelines. In the DPA number 5 guidelines, we look for a number of things and we require a number of things through it. Essentially, the key thing is in the assessment reports, so primarily geotechnical. We also ask for the landslide assessment, and that's included in the package. In reading that, the things that we consider as well is not just that they've submitted the report, but the kind of assumptions that are made and the kind of requirements that are made to mitigate the effect of the development. I will point out that in this particular area, this is essentially bedrock. This is not an issue of gravel sites or developing a lot of units on old gravel pits, sandy soil, silty, alluvial fans. It doesn't have any of those requirements. This is a bedrock area. In terms of what some of the guidelines look at in terms of mitigating impact on steep slopes, it looks at a number of things. The key one being restricting the intensity of the use and the footprint of the building on a steep slope. Often it would require kind of larger lots, mainly to limit the amount of impact on those slopes and the amount of alteration. It looks at vegetation retention, mainly to help slope stability. Again, this impacts a lot more when we're on a more of a graveled slope where it really needs that kind of retention. It isn't as critical to slope stability in this particular site. They've left the 15-meter below it intact. The other we look at is building heights or building site design, mainly to limit site alteration. Those kind of things we look at in terms of the amount of cuts and fills, the amount of artificial alteration onto a slope. Again, not only for visual impact, but also slope stability. In building height and massing, the guidelines address visual impact. This isn't as critical in this development. What we look at in a lot of is when you're building on a ridge top, and instead of getting that nice look of the vegetation on top of the ridge, you get the housing. That is not a case here, so we hadn't had to do too much in that particular guideline. This is a downslope condition. That kind of visual impact has not been of concern. Site grading looks at options to minimize erosion and retaining structures. We can all think of some places in Sechelt that has significant retaining structures that alters the grade and can be quite visually impactful. So the guidelines try and address that. And then the other being stormwater runoff, mainly dealing with erosion. In this particular case, they will need to do a stormwater runoff plan as part of their application, but the stormwater runoff becomes a much bigger issue again when we're dealing with sandy soils that are a little more erosion prone. The two guidelines that are most concerning on this is the notion of, and we also have this reflected in OCP policy, with lands with slopes over 30%, generally not considered suitable for residential development and advise that development should be avoided. This is a common thing in a lot of municipalities with hazard DPs on steep slopes, mainly being that once you kind of get past a certain slope area, it's very hard to mitigate. So the element to look at is it may be considered where it can be demonstrated that it will not create environmental or visual impacts. It can be sensitively integrated with the terrain, and it presents no hazards to person or property. So this is where, in looking at the geotechnical report, the development itself, council has to be satisfied that they've met this in order to essentially accept that they do not meet all the guidelines. Guideline number 3 addresses slopes with 20 to 30% that they may be suitable as long as we're building at lower densities or special site planning techniques. And again, a lot of this has to do when we're dealing with slopes that are quite unstable or can be very challenging to stabilize. The issues that may be present with this is actually the construction itself, the site alteration activity that needs to take place. The geotechnical conditions are not as problematic because it is bedrock. We will not be seeing the same kind of conditions that even a little further down the road we've encountered where there is a lot more erosion activity. These are the site conditions. This is essentially where buildings, I'm just at the edge of the development, but it's essentially where building 5 would be going in. I'm right on the edge of where that 15-meter area is, but you can see the extent of the slope in this area. So in considering approval of this development, council needs to consider the guidelines and the alignment with the guidelines. With foreshore and shoreline protection, they have met that, have met the guidelines for DPA number 3 and number 4. The steep slope ones, there are some significant areas that they have not met. And in form and character considerations, in terms of kind of the look of the building, I think the architect has done a very good job at trying to fit this development with this particular site. The materials are good, and there's a lot of variety on it. So it kind of, on balance, it met a number of the form and character considerations. In terms of the development permit itself, what I put in the package was essentially what the development permit will contain. So it is subject to the Schedule A, which is all the architectural drawings and the material boards. That becomes part of the approval. The landscape plans, the geotechnical reports. There's landscape bonding required to make sure that they do, in fact, implement the landscape plan. There's a tree covenant that goes on that 15-meter setback area, and there's a requirement that all units be adaptable. So the considerations for council are either to approve the DP, subject to the stated terms and conditions as contained in the package, to approve it subject to any other modifications to terms or conditions or additions to the terms, or that council refuse the development permit as it does not sufficiently meet the applicable DP guidelines. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, questions of the report? Director Toth?
Councillor?
Councillor Toth, sorry. I've been doing director all week.
Our blasting bylaw has a site survey requirement of 50 meters. Okay. Do we have the authority as part of these conditions to extend that range beyond what's outlaid in the bylaw itself?
Through the chair, I think you can make that a condition of the development permit to do that.
Okay. I would like to see us add that the blasting site survey is extended to 75 meters.
Okay, so I'll make a note of that and we'll put these down. We'll add these in. I think there's going to be probably a few others. Okay, other questions? Councillor Scott, yes.
Tracy, the strata right away in front of the existing houses and the garages that face that, what would it look like? Like how would we protect the access to those? What would you have to write in there? Just an easement in that or something?
Through the chair, right now it is not a protected access. It wouldn't be closed because it's the access to the rest of their development, but it's not protected. So it would need either probably an easement agreement with the existing strata to ensure access.
So just a clarification, is that you're talking about the top road or the bottom road?
No, the
The one
lower-
between the two,
one
the
between
new one.
and where you've got the garages. So
Just
I
come
would
up with it.
probably want to see something along those lines.
So an access agreement with
An
the
access
existing
agreement
strata
for
over
the,
that strata.
for those garages.
Sorry, it's way back at the beginning. So. It's right on their access. So it is right along, it's this area
Yeah,
here.
there's a couple garages along that.
So.
Yeah.
That road have a name? I saw on the diagrams, there's called 123 Road, but there's no name for it as such, right?
Not
Yet?
an official
Not
name,
yet,
no.
okay. Strata Road. But there is a Strata Road on the other side as well, so how would we specify which one?
We can take it off the survey map and clarify that to make sure that, so if you're building it into a recommendation or a condition, it would be to ensure access to the garages along here. We'll get the proper legal description of that. I don't think there are any garages along there. I don't believe, are there? We can check to just make sure that it meets that requirement, that it's access to those garages.
Any other questions? Oh, he took yours on this side? While they're thinking, is there access assured over the other road, the other Strata Road for buildings 5 and 6?
They have, it's interesting in their strata plan, these guys do, because it comes actually along here. So yes, they do have access along here and to the parking, the surface parking that is on there.
Okay, so all the other buildings are fine except the ones, be 7 through 10.
Correct.
And potential access for the current owners. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, any questions from councillors on this side? None? Okay. Go ahead.
So probably the only other comment I have, and I've talked to Darnell, the mayor, a few times on this is, and it's not something that we have ever done in Seashell before, and it's just the fact that these buildings are built right beside an airport, the Seaplane Water Aerodrome there, and you're starting to see more of it in Vancouver and Richmond, where they're starting to put it as it's cheaper land to develop, but all of a sudden there's airplanes right beside them, and they're putting it on title so that it's recognized that they're right beside an airport. And so that would probably be my third condition to add to this development permit, that it's put on title, that the people buying here recognize that they're right beside a water airport.
What would that clause be that we'd want to put down? Any idea?
It can be a requirement that there be
Notice on title?
a notification to title that identifies proximity. Would it be to water airport or to float plane traffic or?
Aerodrome?
Or-
Water aerodrome?
Okay.
Okay, any questions over here? No, good. Do we have any other questions? So how would you like to take these recommendations one at a time? We've got 2.1, 2.2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we've got some additional ones to add if these get approved. Okay, has everybody got them? It's on page 59. We can approve them each one separately, or vote on each one separately. We can vote on all of them together. It depends on if you look through these, are there any that you would like to address separately? First one looks at terms and conditions with regards to the plans. The second one looks at landscaping. Third one is geotechnical. Fourth is the landscaping bond. 5 is the tree covenant. 6 is lighting. 7 is adaptable standard. And then we have some additional ones to add. Councillor Toth.
Procedurally, I don't know if we should include an extended blast survey range in 2.3 or if it should be 2.8, for example.
Okay, I'll look to staff for that.
I think what it could be is that your alternative or your motion is essentially to approve subject to amendments to the terms and conditions. And the amendments are, and then list those, and then we can add those into the DP. Because I would suggest that what we've got listed as terms and conditions should really be a minimum. I would add to it, I wouldn't subtract. One thing that, with regard to Schedule A, so that is the package that you have in there. It doesn't include the rendering, so if that is something that you wanted added to give extra assurance around the building materials, that could be added to it. But I would suggest most of those things are fairly minimum standards, so it can be just an amendment to that, and then we can just add it into permit conditions as numbered. So adding on to 2.8 or 2.9, and we can just include all those.
2.117, it's the last one on page 59, talks about building material key. So that would be, the stone, the siding, all of those sorts of things, but not necessarily the renderings as presented.
That's correct. It's the building materials themselves.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, so I'm looking for someone to make some kind of motion. Councillor Scott.
Okay. So I move that we move on recommendation 2, based on the terms and conditions of 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, and then the additional amendments of the 75-meter blasting area for the survey.
So you're moving that we approve, subject to amendments and conditions,
Yeah.
that notice be approved for 75-meter radius,
75-meter radius
that...
for the blast survey.
Yes, blast survey. That the access agreement
An
be...
easement agreement for the road access for the garages on the
Okay.
upland buildings. And then the third would be the notice on title, reference proximity to the water aerodrome.
Okay. Did you want to also include the renderings so that the buildings look as they are in the pictures?
And we'll
Okay.
include the renderings.
Include
Sounds
the
good.
renderings. Okay, so we have a motion in front to approve as presented with the amendments and conditions as laid out. Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded. Any other discussion? Councillor McLean.
Am I on? Yep, okay. So this site does have a lot of challenges. It is quite steep. The view from the top is quite debatable. I think it has been debated quite a bit. The view from the water is quite massive. This is a very large development that it's questionable in my mind. It's just so steep. In particular, I take issue with a couple areas of the DPA 5. Point 2, the 30% slopes. And point 6, these ones really get me. Minimize alteration of natural grades. It's massive blasting on this site. And point D under that one, cluster development on less steep slope portions of that site. It's building on the most steep portions of that site. Moving down, still on DPA 5.11. Building site should fit on natural slope contours such that structural retaining walls or extensive cut and fills are not required. So blasting and significant rock removal or fill required to build on site. I'm not seeing a whole lot of effort under this proposal to mitigate some of these issues on the slope. And that just gives me great pause towards this development.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, I'm going to weigh in here a bit. It is a difficult site. I agree. It's a difficult site. If this site had not been pre-zoned, it would not be in front of us now. I want to commend council for asking for lots of information and doing due diligence. I have no idea how this vote's going to go, but staff and the developer have brought forward a lot of information so that we can look at the areas that are within our purview to determine which way we're going to go on this. I know one of the concerns that we've had along the way is safety, because that's one of the ones we have to look at under the DP5. And I know that we've gotten a lot of information on that over the last number of weeks. So whichever way this goes, I want to commend council for doing your homework, asking for all the information so that you could make an informed decision. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, so I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Would you like to vote opposed? And would you like that recorded?
No.
Thank you. All right. Move on to item 10.2. Thank you, staff, for your patience. Item 10.2, Sechelt Public Library Funding and Service Agreement. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. And we'll turn this over to Mr. Stewart, Director of Corporate and Financial Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This report is dealing with the Sechelt Public Library funding for 2019 and the service agreement. Basically covers both of these areas. It's a challenge here for us with the contract expired at the end of 2018, so we're now looking at a new funding agreement with the library going from 2019, potentially for a 5-year term. One of the challenges I'm finding with this, I think my counterparts at the SCRD and the SIGD, is really there's no mechanism for the three or the governments to come together and negotiate as a body, other than staff getting together and then coming back to our respective boards and councils and telling you what's going on and getting direction from you. So with that in mind, in our discussion with them, it was felt that the best approach may be for me to come first to this council and find out how you felt about the funding request from the library and also the funding allocation. I would then pass on that information to my counterparts at the regional district and the Indian government district and let them take that to their respective boards. The reason it's coming to you now as opposed to being part of the normal budget process is really a timing issue, mostly with the regional district that have their budget completed by the end of March to allow them to get their requisitions to us to get our budget completed by May 15th. So what the library is asking for is essentially an increase in their base funding of about $88,683. Also an increase, an ongoing expense of $70,000 for a library supervisor, and then 3 one-time items, one for some capital expenses of $41,800, materials of $28,516, and a replenishment of the reserves that they dipped into last year as part of the recruitment expense for $10,000. So the way I've written up the recommendation here is essentially everything you could approve. I thought it would be easier to lay it out for you, and then you can elect to take something off as opposed to try to craft the resolutions as you go. So as I said, I put this into 2 areas. One is to get council to endorse the entire funding request of the library. So the numbers I just pointed out are the total amounts that the library is requesting for their budget. So to see if council would endorse the total amount subject to the other funders contributing their share. We then get into what their share would be. So at this point, I'm proposing that for 2019, the share remain the same as it was based on the agreement that we just had for the last 5 years, which essentially has the district picking up 63.1% of the cost of any library, the library contract. But going forward, as far as the new agreement, I thought council may want to consider some other ways of allocating the costs among the various funders. I don't know how they'll react to this, because as you can see in the other 2 cases, the funding for the district went down considerably, but it certainly was something worth considering and passing on to our counterparts and seeing if they'd be willing to consider it. So if we based on this 2016 census population, you can see the district share would go down to 56.92 or 57% of the cost of the contract. And if we base it on assessed values, the district share is about 44.5% of the cost of the contract. So there's other ways of doing it. I don't know how the 63.1 came on, if that was an historical account from before. So I can't explain where that 63.1 came at the time, but that's certainly what the contract has been for the last 5 years anyway. So at this point, I'm really just seeking council's direction as how you'd like us to proceed.
Okay, I'll just give council a bit of an update from the SCRD table. The library did present yesterday, Tuesday, at the regional district. The board actually asked for additional information on how the cost would be split up between the areas. And so they referred it back to staff for some additional information. It'll be coming forward in beginning of March, round 2. Another question that they asked was with regards to capital funding under their function. So they were informed that the way the functions were set up that they used to fund the library, they're not allowed to use any of those funds for capital. It can only be for operating. And then they were not aware of the conversation around potentially renegotiating the allocation of costs. So this would be a question to you around this. If we pass this the way this is, in number 4, it actually lays out our portion of the capital expenses. How would that be if the regional district areas, electoral areas, could not fund capital? Would this limit us in how we put funding forward? Or could this be changed down the road so that potentially a greater share of the funds from the District of Sechelt could go towards capital and versus the regional districts for operating? Do you understand what I'm kind of saying in there?
I think so. I mean, we're certainly not restricted the way the regional district is based on the bylaws they have. So I think how council chose to fund any of these requests could be done, and we could reallocate the numbers. One challenge is that I'm proposing that the base operating grant to the library supervisor be funded from current revenue because they're ongoing expenses versus the capital items coming from prior year surplus because they're really one-time expenditures. So we could still fund it the way I proposed here, and if you want to just adjust the amounts to counter the issue with the regional district and their capital.
So if we needed to come back and revisit those amounts somehow, depending on what happens at the other.
We certainly could. Our budget doesn't have to be finalized till after the regional district. So I think even going forward, this recommendation would indicate to the regional district that if you approve of the total request from the library, they can certainly take that into consideration and essentially come back with another proposal, which could be brought back to council prior to us finalizing our budget.
Okay. Any questions by councillors? Councillor Rowe.
The $88,000, oops, that was silly, for base operating funding, would that be ongoing then? Is that for this next year and then in perpetuity?
That would be the assumption. They've put together a 5-year proposal that has a $88,000 increase this year and then a 4% increase every year thereafter.
Okay.
But we're still negotiating or looking at that 5-year agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McLean.
But to be clear, today we're looking at approving funding for only 2019, and beyond that is to be negotiated?
That is correct.
But with the assumption that what we approve for 2019 will set a precedent for the negotiations, or who knows?
I guess it could be assumed that that would set the new base level for them, yes.
Any other questions? Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, just, I was at the budget meetings and we talked, the library put a proposal to us, and it seems like they've been, I guess, underfunded slightly in the past years, and they haven't been able to buy new equipment that they've needed to, keep up to date, like their computers are antiquated and reaching the end of their lives. So whatever. I mean, the libraries are becoming more important in our communities as we move along, and people don't have access to computers or to books or whatever. So one of the things, though, this is, just sort of a guess by myself. I think this is probably a 1.5% increase on our taxes. This is going to be a tax increase to provide these funds for the library.
Yes, Your Worship, works out to about 1.14%.
1.14, okay. And then we've previously approved approximately 4% on the first ask from the bureaucracy or
You're
whatever,
talking about
from
the
from-
pre-approvals? The pre-approved?
Yeah, so
pre-approvals,
we've
yeah.
pre-approved about approximately 4% already.
No, because all you pre-approved was the capital expenditures,
Okay,
which really doesn't have a specific direct tax impact. Money's coming out of the capital reserve, so you haven't actually approved
okay.
any tax increase other than the $52,000 for the CIP grant, which was actually included in the base budget anyway. So there's no tax increase for those.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Toth.
Not a question so much as a little statement. I'd written a thing because I was going to present a petition back in the summertime on behalf of the Friends of the Library, and I didn't get to present it, so darn it, I'm going to say what I have to say. Who doesn't love a library? I would wager that my 9-year-old daughter has probably checked out more books from this library than anyone else in this room put together, myself included, and I practically grew up in the library when it was over on Trail Avenue. Our family's even on the book quilt that the library sold fundraising space on when it first opened here, and which hung in the entryway until their recent renovations. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find people in this community who find funding a library to be a generally bad idea. I mean, where else can you walk into a public space, take basically as much off the shelves as you can carry, and walk out, so long as you promise to try and return everything by a certain date? Try that over at Clayton's and see how it goes. It's truly amazing that people of all walks of life have free and open access to the world's information through our public libraries. Whether it's books on the shelves, the interlibrary loan program, BC Building Code, or this fancy internet thing that the people of my generation grew up with, the world is at our fingertips, and librarians are there to help us reach our full potential in exploring that vast realm of knowledge. Doesn't our library deserve the proper funding to be the best that it can be? I think so, and that's why I'm happy to move recommendations 2 through 5. Thank you.
Is there a seconder for that? Second. Any other comments? Councillor McLean.
I'm just trying to sort out these recommendations and some of the discussion later in the report, particularly around percentages and how much each one is funding. So currently we fund 63%, and there's 2 proposals to either do 57% or 44%. I'd really like us to see us move to the base it on population. The library is a human service, so humans should be fairly taxed for it across the Sunshine Coast. So, yeah, I'd really like to see that proportion. We set the precedent now, and we can bring that back to the SCRD saying this is what we want. Work with us.
Okay, so I think staff can take that direction forward. I don't think we'll make a forward motion at this point on that, but you can make a note of that and take that forward and see what kind of response you get on the other side.
Right.
Councillor Scott.
I really agree with Matt's comments on that. I might take it one step further. If we're going to throw in this extra funding, it isn't about having the regional district increase the funding so that we can decrease ours, but maybe the library just gets that extra funding to not be average or just below average is what this seems to maintain, but maybe actually it'll be above average.
You have your marching orders.
Thank you.
Any other comments? All those in favor? Thank you very much. Move on to item 10.3. This is Bounty Development. Rezoning application Lot B, Acorn Road, West Seashelt. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And I'm going to turn over to staff for our report.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. So we've got a rezoning application here
that's intended to facilitate an 8-lot subdivision. There's also the concurrent subdivision application, but what we're considering here is what to do with the rezoning application. This particular application is in a situation that isn't unique to any particular location in the in the district of Sechelt. There's a number of different areas that are facing a similar problematic situation where we have conflicts between the official community plan, the land use designations, and the policies, both within the plan, but also between the plan and the current zoning. And that's the case for this property where the OCP has a designation of mixed residential multifamily over this property and a number of adjacent properties. And that sort of the policies and everything within that OCP designation doesn't actually align with the current zoning of this particular property or the neighboring properties, and the proposed rezoning therefore also conflicts with what's intended under that multifamily designation in terms of what they're trying to do from rezoning from a rural zone to a residential zone. So we're kind of in a situation where the proposed rezoning doesn't meet with the OCP policies and the land use designation, and the OCP land use designation itself doesn't make sense for that area as a whole. So what we're kind of seeking direction on from council is for this area, we need some more work on what is the intended sort of land use in this area on the sort of western edge of West Sechelt. This multifamily mixed residential designation, is that really where we want to go here? It's quite higher density than really you would anticipate that far out. It's in close proximity to rural and agricultural land reserve areas. So there's some growth management issues that we need to address there. And that goes further into some of the other areas all around Sechelt that are kind of facing a similar challenge where we need to address primary and secondary growth areas, the designations in the plan about what we actually want to happen here, and aligning that with the current zoning of these properties. So if you have any questions.
Thank you. Any questions on the report?
I just have a quick question. It says the orange area where this proposed site is multifamily mixed residential. So what does that look like what does that mean versus what they're proposing?
Yeah, so what it means is a much higher density and much smaller lots than what they're proposing. So what we end up with is the proposed rezoning application doesn't actually go far enough, in a sense, to meet the requirements of the multifamily designation in terms of much smaller lot sizes and more lots. It's more of what's being proposed is more of a suburban level density. That's a bit of a change from the rural density right next door to the north. But again, the multifamily designation is a much higher density than you would really want in that area. That's where we're getting into this problematic situation where the proposed rezoning doesn't meet with the intent of what the OCP designation is actually setting out in terms of density, and then having that big area of designated for more intense multifamily right on the boundary of rural and agricultural lands quite far out in West Sechelt also poses challenges for. It's an unserviced area. Do we really want to be promoting more intense growth there versus other areas that are already serviced that are closer to downtown? And so that's where. Does that answer your?
So what you're saying is the OCP says it should be multifamily, but it doesn't actually make sense to put multifamily in that location.
Yeah, so there's the two aspects. One, the proposed rezoning doesn't actually meet the OCP multifamily designation in terms of the amount of density that they would need there, and the OCP designation itself doesn't really make sense in that area for the amount of density and style of density that's trying to promote.
So the OCP needs to be changed.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions from council? Councillor Lamb?
So I'm just kind of wondering how long has this proposal been in the process? Like, have they just put it in and you've turned them down, or have they been working on it for 6 months or a year?
Yeah, it's been in process since the summer. I believe it was August.
Okay.
I think it was when they applied. But again, since that time, there's been some staff turnover. So we're there's a number of applications in a similar situation that have kind of taken longer than they should to get to a certain point about moving forward or not. So.
Okay. So for it to get to this, for it to get to here, is there, it's just something that's sort of happened in the past, is where a developer or someone comes in, they want to do a development, and then they get told everything's great, and then you have a change of staff, which we've definitely had over the last 4 years, and so you bring in a new staff member and the rules change. So, one of the things we have to do moving forward is make sure that we have a consistent set of rules or regulations that when somebody comes in, if it gets handed off to somebody else, that the developer, whoever it is, can move forward knowing that he's going to be taken care of and the rules don't change and the game doesn't change. So, I mean, what have we done in the past where you run into, a situation like this? I mean, you're telling us that it's zoned multifamily, and you're saying that multifamily doesn't want to be out there, or we don't want, the planning department doesn't want it to be there. When we were going through our election process, the people in West Sechelt, they said, okay, we'll have some density here, but we don't want a whole bunch of density. And I think this council would like to have the density in the downtown core. So,
Okay, I'm
obviously,
gonna jump in here. I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
But, so what I think we're seeing from staff is they're looking at our OCP and saying, it doesn't actually have the community developing the way we want it to. We've had staff here who've had lots of history in this, and in times they worked around some of those limitations. And what our staff are saying now is, it's time we actually have our documentation reflect what we want it to reflect. And so they're bringing this to us so that we become aware of that. If you look at number 4 in the recommendations, the recommendation is that we direct staff to review and amend the secondary growth areas, land use designations, and urban containment boundaries and approaches in the OCP. I agree with you. We want developers and people in the community to be able to look at our OCP and say, this is the way it is. That we don't continually get OCP amendments having to come to us. But there are areas in the OCP that don't make sense. And this is one of them, where we don't want to put a multi-story residential building where there's no transit, there's no sewer. It doesn't make any sense. So, staff have said, tell us what you want us to do. And I think we've all heard that we need to do some work on this. So we just need to direct staff to do it. It causes conflict for developers, it causes conflict for the community. If we can get some of this work done, there's going to be more certainty on everybody's part, and we won't be pitting people against each other and the community against our staff. It doesn't work for anybody. Any other questions, comments? Councillor McLean.
Yeah, so I think we can agree OCP is confusing and contradictory to itself at times, including this particular case. We need to review it, and we need to make sure that development is being done right. So, unfortunately, this particular application is going to get caught up in this. I think it's going to get delayed while we get our house figured out, get that OCP figured out, figure out what the community want from developments like this. So I'd like to move recommendations 2 through 4.
I'm going to request that we do these individually, because there's another option that I think may deal with this differently in the options below. So I recommend we do this one at a time. So recommendation number 2, and this is that the rezoning application be denied, and you're moving that. Is there a seconder? Okay, there's a seconder for that. And any comments? Okay, so I'll weigh in. I don't think it should be denied at this point, and the reason is that it's not, I mean, they're looking to do something that actually works in that area. It does not fit the OCP, but it works in the area. So rather than number 2, so I'd be voting against that, I would do the option 3 below, that we refer it back to staff with direction to amend the official community designation so that they can work with the applicant to have it actually be in conformity. Councillor McLean.
I would go the other way and say it doesn't work with the area. Currently, we have a multi-family zoned area to the south of this lot, but it's not built yet. Until I see people living in those homes and it's ready to go, this is a very rural area. And at this time, the RR1 zoning is appropriate for the area. When it changes, we can look at it again. But as it sits right now, the current zoning is appropriate.
Okay, question to staff. RR1 zoning, what's the size of the lot? And you have to put it, sorry, you have to put it in acres for me. I don't know the, I know the current request or the current application is for half-acre lots.
Yep, so the RR1, the rural 1 zone, the minimum parcel size for new subdivisions is 1.5 hectares, or sorry, acres, 1.5 acres, or 6,667 square meters.
Okay, so 1.5 acres, okay. Councillor McLean?
So just to clarify, they could split the current lot into 2.
Okay, any other comments? Councillor Scott?
Alden and I are just kind of questioning that lot to the west that's already zoned R1. Is that a recent zoning change, or is that just an anomaly, old legacy, like the whole area? Okay, thank you.
Which one are you looking at? That's on page 179?
We pulled up the zoning for the whole area just to see what it. So there's an R1 just to the west of it.
That yellow one up there?
That's R1.
So you have the lot in question, then you have an R1 just down the way.
Okay,
Oh.
yes. Staff?
Yeah, I've noticed that too. I don't know what the history on that is too. It's strange that it would be R1 out there too when everything around it is R1. So that would be something for us to look at in addition to both under the zoning bylaw review, but also I think that property also falls under that multifamily designation in the OCP too. So
Yes, it does.
there's a number of those properties that are sort of one-offs where we have to look at the history of how did that happen and why did that happen.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Councillor McLean?
Just for a little more context, the property to the south is zoned CD 27. If you go into that development, it's mostly essentially R1 with 2 higher density areas within the larger development, but most of it's developed to a R1 standard.
Any other questions, comments? Councillor Toth.
And as part of that CD 27, just further to that, those R1 lots are designated as sort of quarter acre-ish. So this one being half acre lots, it's almost a transition to the farmland. It's really,
Okay, any other comments? So we're voting on number 2. This is that the rezoning application be denied. All those in favor of the recommendation? So we've got 3. All opposed? That's defeated. Let's look at number 3. That council provide direction to staff regarding the conflicting OCP and zoning designations and what the desired intention would be for this area. Do we have to? Yes. I would rather look at number 4. I think it's a bigger picture kind of question. And that we'd have you come back and look, I mean, we're going to run into the same kind of thing that Ian's talking about there. We've got this R1, but it's zoned, the OCP is this. And how do we do the transitions? We have to look at that all around the community. So recommendation number 4, that we direct staff to review and amend the secondary growth areas, land use designations, and urban containment boundaries and approaches in the OCP. Move that. Is seconder for that? Okay. Any comments on this? All those in favor? Okay. So then, if we look at the, yes, 3 below, I'll make that motion that we do. You make that motion? Okay. Make a motion. Council refer the application back to staff with direction to amend the official community plan designation. And is there a seconder for that? Seconder? Any comments? All those in favor? All right, thank you very much. And we'll look at next item, 10.4. Remedial action requirement, 5566 Nickerson Road, Seashelt. First, a motion to receive the report. Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And who is speaking to this one? Ms. Corbett.
Thank you, Worship. So the item in front of you is a request to authorize a remedial action order. And this is an enforcement action that's authorized through the community charter under Section 74. And it's where we've had contraventions to zoning bylaw, building bylaw, or where there's an unsafe or unhealthy condition. In this particular element, it kind of hits all of those. So it's looking at the ability to move forward on the remedial action order. It does involve notice. It does involve some process associated with it. I will say, our enforcement officers were out this morning and a couple of days ago. I think having this on the agenda helped. So the garbage has been picked up. They're still having some issues with some of the other stuff. There's some communication issues on there, but it's getting straightened out. So it's useful to, in a lot of cases, to trigger it. I can assure you that our bylaw enforcement officers work very diligently to find compliance options. They're not looking for an opportunity to clear someone's site out, but it's having that ability to try and work with them to bring it into compliance. And this is one order that allows us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor McLean?
So notice here one of our alternatives is to defer the consideration. Given that you have seen improvements so far, could we defer it to next meeting and hope it's resolved by then? Would that be productive, or are you still looking for the full actions from staff.
Staff?
Through the chair, there is a time period with it, so even if you approved it tonight, before we would take any action, so there's two things to look at with here. If under one of the recommendations, under 2.3, it's that you deem it to be an unsafe condition and it gives them 21 days. So that particular subsection is suggesting that you deem it to be a significant risk to health and safety. If it's not deemed to be significant, they have a minimum 30 days to take, or at least this doesn't take effect for 30 days. It may take longer. It's just that you can't do it under the provisions of the community charter. You have to give them at least 30 days unless you do that deeming clause. So an option would be perhaps to not do the 21 days or not deem it health and safety. You can just go to, we'll do a minimum 30 days. That's also an option in terms of the compliance. So there's a couple of options there. It's not like we're going to take action tomorrow. There's a notice time period.
Any other questions? Councillor Rowe?
Are the safety concerns around the garbage or around strangers being on the property, or specifically, do we know?
Through the chair, initially it was the garbage because it was really getting out of hand. There was a lot of it, and there were concerns around a number of things associated with that, also fire hazard. There are a number of issues on that property, some of which go well beyond our authority and are involving the RCMP. So there are some things we can do and some things that we cannot. It is very much, it's concerning. Is there immediate risk to life and limb? No. But there's a lot of issues on there related to what they're doing on the property. As mentioned in the report, it looked as though there were people living in the trailers. They're running power into it. There was a little concern about how close together they were as well, so we want to make sure that at minimum they get some separation in there because it did look like a fire hazard. So yeah, it's a complex case on this one.
Okay, I have a question. Page 183 in one of the recommendations. This is number 2.34. It mentions that district notice by providing the district's corporate officer written notice within 7 days of the date on which the notice was sent. But then if we go down to page 187, it says the owner may within 14 days of mailing request council reconsideration. Is 14 the default? And in this case, we have set it for this situation to be 7 days?
On that one, it was because we were only giving them 21. So again,
to get it dealt with.
Yes. So there's always an option for anyone who gets this kind of order to come before you and ask for reconsideration. And so there's timing, minimum timings on that. Because this report was written as well before they moved the garbage off. So there was a concern about getting in there and getting that out. So we did a different time period of the 21 days and then up the reconsideration time. If there's a desire to change the notification time and not apply the 21 days, we can go to a 14 on the reconsideration, if that makes any sense to you.
I believe we've been in communication with them a lot. Yes, we've been in communication with them a lot. They know that this is something that's coming forward. They have been notified that it's on our agenda. Okay. Any other council questions? would you like to make a recommendation? Councillor McLean.
I will move recommendation 2.
Or seconder? Seconded. Any other comments, questions? All those in favor? Thank you. Item 10.5. Oh, how did I just switched agendas? How did I do that? 10.5, this is on Lighthouse Pub Horse Racing Teletheater application. First, a motion to receive the report. All those in favor? Thank you, and we'll turn to... Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. The item before you, it's a request by TBC Teletheater BC to relocate an existing teletheater license. They've been operating at Gilligan's Pub since 1996, and now with the sale of that pub, they would like to just transfer that service over to the Lighthouse Pub. As a requirement of the Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch, they require a resolution from the local government. Because this is a transfer and it's not a standalone use, it doesn't require any other kind of notification. It's simply a resolution of council. It's within an existing pub. It's within an existing license. So it's all it really involves. It's essentially teletheater, TVs, and automatic betting options in there. We've checked in to RCMP and with bylaw to see if there had been any issues related to Gilligan's. It's kind of interesting. None of us knew it existed, so they've been very good. There have been no issues whatsoever with it, so we're recommending that council support this request. Thank you.
Any questions by council? Recommendation? Councillor Scott, you're moving that? Second. Any other questions? All in favor? Thank you very much. 10.6. This is Aviation Infrastructure Funding Grant application. First, a motion to receive. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And we'll turn over to our Director of Corporate Finance.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in December of last year, the provincial government announced its 5th call for applications for the BC Air Access Program. This is funding through the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure. The deadline for application is February 18th, so which is why it's coming for you now to seek approval for us to basically apply for a grant to do some work at the airport. So we did seek some quotes to find out what work could be done and what the prices would be. You can see on page 197 of the agenda at the bottom, there was 4 areas that were identified. One was to resurface the main runway about 2,400 feet for a cost of just over $1.03 million. Another is to extend the runway additional 700 feet for a cost of just over $356,000. We also looked at just a surface tie-down area for $47,000 and resurfacing the existing apron for about $129,000. So at this time, what we're recommending is to seek funding for the first 2 items on that list there. So the resurfacing of the main runway plus extending the runway the additional 700 feet. This would essentially allow for a slightly longer runway. It would make the runway safer. It's primarily for safety reasons. The BC Air Access Program provides funding for 75% of the cost, so the district would be required to come up with an additional 25%, or just over $346,000 So what we're proposing there is that we seek a grant through the Island Coast Economic Trust to cover the district's share of the 25% funding. Should that be unsuccessful, we could consider other funding sources later. It would qualify for gas taxes. If we did that, we'd have to look at adjusting the budget, but that decision doesn't have to be made until we find out whether these grant applications are even successful.
Thank you very much. Councillor Toth.
I just want to be 100% clear. If we're successful with both applications, cost to taxpayers, $0.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I would point to page 197. And I'm going to look at the right above where you've got the, yes, right there. It indicates that, 1976 it was updated, and it's reached or exceeded the end of its life cycle. So it's an immediate priority. And the last part says that if we don't do it, failure to do so could result in Transport Canada declaring the airfield unsafe and causing it to be closed. And I understand they could actually even take away the designation. That's what I've been told. So I'm totally in support of this. Councillor Scott.
I'm very much in support of this too. Basically what's going to happen is if we don't move on the runway, we're just going to have to tear it up and make it a gravel strip, which is fine for most people except for the drag racers. So I'm excited with this. I think this is a great start, and if we can have access to $1.5 million, so we're crazy not to do it.
Any other comments? Okay.
Just so people understand, an extra 700 feet on this runway would allow a medevac airplane to get in and out of here, which it can't now. So there's better access to medevac services if the helicopters aren't running.
Any other comments? Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, I just, this is a great opportunity, I think, for Sechelt, you know, to upgrade our airport, and exactly what Councillor Stott said, just, get some more services in here and get more better access to Sechelt. Thank you.
Councillor Rowe.
I'll make a motion to move recommendations 2 to 4.
And seconded? All in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for bringing that forward. Item 10.7, parcel tax roll review panel appointments. Motion to receive the report, moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. And back to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is maybe kind of new to this council. It was through discussion with the regional district, we realized we were missing a step in the parcel tax review process. Essentially, the two parcel taxes, or two of the parcel taxes are actually from the regional district, and they prepare the roll. But the way the legislation's written is they then pass it on to us, and the community charter takes over, and we then have to follow the process to get the roll, basically authenticated. So the process here is to get that done. The roll review panel only needs to meet if there's changes to be made to the roll. And we anticipate this year there are changes, or we know there'll be changes made to the roll. We're proposing them. Again, through the regional district, they determined that there was a number of properties that were deemed exempt from the recreation tax and the water parcel tax that are being added to the roll. So letters are being communicated to these individuals or the properties affected. They may decide to challenge it, in which case the panel would have to meet to adjudicate. So really this is a process to allow for the panel to be created and setting the meeting in case anyone does actually complain about the addition to the roll.
Okay, so previously we we had 3 counselors put their names forward to be on this panel. We'd indicated initially that the meeting was going to be at 2:30 on that date. We moved it back to 2 o'clock. So before we move this forward, I want to confirm that the 3 names that are there, so Councillor Toth, Kuster, and Rowe, that 2 o'clock will actually work for you? Okay. Any other questions? So would somebody like to move recommendations 2 and 3? Moved and seconded? All in favor? Thank you very much. And appointment of SCRD alternate directors. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And we'll turn this over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. As set out in the report, this was actually brought forward at the request of the mayor, basically as it's set out there, to allow more flexibility for council's alternate directors to replace the appointed directors. The thought is, or the recommendations there are, to rescind the previous council resolution that appointed directors and alternate directors, and instead, pursuant to Section 200B of the Local Government Act, have the alternates appointed in such a way as that they can take the place of any absent director or councillor, rather than a designated one. So the recommendations there are before you to affect that.
Okay, and this actually, given that actually most of this council is working, and it's the first time we've had 2 directors on at the regional district, through some investigative work in the corporate or the community charter, we found that while in the past we've always appointed one alternate director as a representative or a replacement of one of the directors, we actually could appoint both in a pool, which would give us more flexibility around work schedules. So thank you for putting this together. And I'm going to look for recommendation 2 and 3. Moved. Yes, you can. Yeah, moved in second. Okay. All those in favor? Thank you very much. And we have 10.9, Bike BC funding grant application. Motion to receive. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. And turn it over to somebody. You can fluff your way. Go ahead. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, we sent the manager home because we thought this would be a much later evening. This is a really interesting opportunity to get bike lanes into an area that we have been talking about in both planning department and in engineering. We've got some development interest in that area. It serves the school. It's well used. It's dangerous at the moment. So it's very timely that this came in, provides an opportunity through the BC Bike to get just a little bit over $500,000 in grant. We need to do the 25% portion. The majority of that would come from reserve as well as DCC, so the impact on tax requisition would be minimal, if anything. So in terms of the area, in terms of where it's upgrading, it's going in from essentially from Reef past Marine Way up toward the school through Shoal. We had been hoping to get some improvements done through a particular development, and that development stopped. So this is a really nice opportunity to get the full connection into it. So we'd highly recommend that you allow us to move forward on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And was there anything else you wanted to add?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, yes, as mentioned, it's approximately $730,000 project, $547,000 coming from the grant. So Reed Reed Road is actually part of the DCC bylaw, which is why it's separated out. The DCC bylaw has it funded 75% from development cost charges and 25% from other district revenue. So that's why the one is showing $61,295 coming from development cost charges, and the remainder for that road coming from gas tax money. The other two projects are not part of the DCC bylaw, so which is why they'd be recommended to be funded from gas taxes completely. So the total come from gas tax is $121,000. In talking to Mr. Bandera this morning, because you're committing this now and there's certainly the rest of the budget to consider, most of the gas tax or much of the gas tax funds or available funds have been allocated or at least earmarked for other projects. So the question would be, if this went forward, what could potentially be removed if we couldn't get it in with the other gas tax? And his suggestion on that would be the Mason Road project, that we could scale it down and allocate or move the $121,000 and just do less on Mason Road, probably less to the, I never know which way north and south is, away from the water. Yes.
So if we got approval for this, or got the funding for this, we would basically, with the Trail Avenue project, have a bike path going from Torito all the way to Kinnickinnick Park.
That's correct.
Awesome. Actually could ride without having to stop and get off and walk or go around trees or whatever. Get hit by cars, yes. Yeah, all right. Any questions of staff on this one? Councillor Toth.
It's not so much a question for staff as it is a general observation. Safety around our schools, awesome. The ability to get our kids on bicycles and having parents driving them less, awesome. Parking around Kinnickinnick is an issue anytime they have an event. And I'm noticing here that on Lighthouse Avenue, the shoulder of the road that has been historically parking is being designated as a no parking zone because of the bike path. And I don't know if there's anywhere else that people trying to attend functions at Kinnickinnick can park. So just a thought that I saw there.
Okay, so what page are you seeing that on? 252, next one.
Oh, that's stop there.
251 at the top? And 252, okay. 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 Can that be adjusted down the road should we need to do this? This would be a question to staff.
I have an answer.
Okay, Councillor McLean.
So I asked that question to Sanat exactly earlier, and he said the amount is fixed, but we can change the design. The design is outdated. It's an old design. So if it's generally the same project, we can do it. But if we want to make small changes that don't impact the budget too much, he said that would be possible.
Perfect, thank you. Councillor Toth.
So the design is preliminary for grant application. If we decided not to proceed with that side of Lighthouse Avenue, we could widen the path in other parts, for example, right? Because we're still looking to spend the same amount of money on the project.
Okay.
As I understand it, as long as we still work on Lighthouse Avenue, we can't just drop it.
All right, any other questions? Is there a recommendation that somebody would like to make? Councillor McLean.
I will move recommendations 2 and 3.
Is there a seconder for that? Seconder, any other questions? All those in favor? Thank you very much. All right. We're now at council reports. Okay, I don't remember where I started last time. Go start on this end this time? Okay. Councillor Todd.
Council business has been fairly quiet for me the last couple of weeks. I sat in on a couple of SCRD meetings, including policing and the water. I also participated in the SCRD meeting on solid waste, which is helping to sort of inform and educate me as we move into our discussions about solid waste here in Sechelt. However, water. I'm pleased to see progress coming forward from the SCRD on that. I'm a little disappointed that we need to spend a year doing monitoring before we can apply for the license for the wells at Church Road. That's another summer of drought, another summer of my vegetable garden struggling, and another year of sitting and waiting on reports. I've heard from people with some experience in applying for water licenses, and there may be a way to get around that requirement, and I look forward to that discussion somewhere in the future here.
Councillor Scott.
Well, the council stuff's been quiet on my end. Other than the regular meetings, I have nothing to report.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Much like Councillor Toth, have spent a lot of time at the SCRD this month. We had a lunch and learn up there with the Ministry of Transportation, which was interesting. They are in the process of renewing their contract with Capilano, and they feel that they've got some service improvements coming, including putting the reflectors back on the highway. So a lot of people have been asking me about where the reflectors went. So the people that drive the school buses coming off the last ferry will be happy. We also toured Chapman Creek Water Treatment Center, which was amazing. That was first time for me. And I'm feeling like getting drinking water for $250 a year after seeing that place, and the people that work there is a screaming deal. Otherwise, pretty quiet. There's a project that I've been working on outside of politics that through the seniors planning table, we've received a grant to start a caregiver support group on the Sunshine Coast. So I went to the initial meeting of that. I'm not going to be super involved, but just sort of on a consulting kind of basis. So you'll be hearing more about that in the community. That's going to be a very exciting project. It's a 3-year project that they've received a donation for. So that's great. That's it.
Councillor McLean.
Okay, so Councillor Rowe took one of my points. I attended the seniors planning table meeting, and it's all good. And that, I gotta say, is a great group of people working to address seniors issues on the coast. I was really impressed. So there's 2 key things that came out of that. The caregiver support network that Brenda mentioned. And also Minister Tassi from the federal government, she's the Minister of Seniors, is going to be coming to the Sunshine Coast on Monday. We figure that this is the first federal minister to visit the Sunshine Coast since the Liberals were elected. So it's kind of a big deal. Normally they don't take the ferry over, and they just visit West Van. So she's going to be doing a roundtable on seniors issues on Monday, February 11th at 3 p.m. at the Senior Center. I hope many people can attend that. Excellent. Moving on, later that day, or no, I don't know my days. I attended a public information session about wildfire interface. So Al Beaver is a wildfire expert who lives in Gibsons. And he did a presentation about the 1906 fire in Gibsons. So he modeled it and figured what would be the impact of that fire happened in Gibsons today. It was super fascinating. He figured out what would burn, what wouldn't, what's high risk, what's lower risk. It was amazing. And the really neat thing is he has partnered with the town of Gibsons to apply for a grant to allow the entire Sunshine Coast to do better wildfire interface planning. So that's when a wildfire comes into our community. So I'm really hoping that Gibsons gets that grant and we can start having those conversations. Last one is the community response meeting. So that's a really cool group of people in the community who are dealing with adult abuse issues. Essentially, they got a bunch of people who are dealing with these issues in one room, and they discussed what challenges they're facing, how they can work together better, and what gaps they're facing. So I just want to say that that was amazing, and let's look at other opportunities that we can create to bring all these different players into one room to address some critical issues that we're facing on the Sunshine Coast.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb.
Spent Monday and Tuesday at the regional district on the budget for this year. So, yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Councillor Kuster.
So I'm not sure if this was before our last council meeting or after, but I didn't talk about it last time if it is. So me, along with a couple of other councillors, attended a tour of the Water Resource Centre. It's the first time for me, and I have to say that it was it's an amazing facility, and the passion and level of commitment shown by Christine was really admirable. And yeah, we have a top-notch centre there, and I was really impressed by it, the tour. And last Monday, I attended the Sunshine Coast Youth Action and Awareness Committee meeting. And as a parent of a teenage daughter who is highly involved in youth support activities, I'm happy to see the level of commitment that this community has for supporting our youth. Our youth face so many challenges, both with peers, bullying in school, and many cases on the home front. It can be so stressful and sometimes leading them down a path that is not desirable and or physically making them ill. At the meeting, there were many members of this community, including youth outreach workers, youth in transition, public health, community school, SCRD recreation groups. There's groups supporting LGBTQ youth, First Nations youth, supporting eating disorders, body image, community service groups focusing on mental health and addictions and drug use, and so many more. So I was just like really blown away by the level of commitment we have there, and I'm looking forward to attending those meetings. And there's a lot of great events and programs, grants, and coming up this year, and I'm looking forward to giving you that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, council report. Oh my goodness. I'm not going to mention anything you guys all mentioned. Ministry of Indigenous Relations came and did a presentation at the regional district, looking at the foundation agreement that the Shishalt Nation have signed and giving some background on that. And we'll be coming to do some work with us here in Shishalt because we're directly impacted. I also was a moderator at Volunteer Sunshine Coast launch. So this is looking at people in the community with varying areas of expertise and how they can become involved in the community in giving back, and how those organizations in the community who are looking for services can actually access them. So it's kind of a marrying up of those with needs with those who are willing to provide that service. So they've just done the launch. It will be online, so you'll be able to go and do a search and find out, is there somebody, I don't know, who could provide strategic planning or budgeting or bookkeeping or whatever, and then marrying up with those who have those services. Shishalt Chamber AGM met with the CEO, Mark Collins, and had a conversation. It was Laurie Pratt, Chair of the Regional District, Bill Beamish, Mayor of Gibsons, and I, as well as I think Alton was there with us, and we laid out some of our concerns on the Sunshine Coast. We've already received some responses, and we have a few others to follow up with. It was a great event. He did a presentation, and the people who were there were pretty straight with him, and he answered their questions in a way that I think they understood where he was coming from and why some of the things that we're looking for haven't actually happened to date, but he got a lot of feedback and is taking some of that information away. Naloxone training. So Sean was there. He was standing on a table here, I won't tell you, but we are looking to raise the awareness around drug users on the Sunshine Coast. And so we had this event where I, Mayor Bill Beamish, Chair Lori Pratt, and Chief Warren Paul from the Shishelt Nation came in here, and we were trained in how to give naloxone to someone who's having an issue overdosing on drugs. We're looking to I'm part of the CATS team, the Community Action Team. We have a lot of people on the Sunshine Coast who are overdosing on drugs. And it's not necessarily who you think it is. It could be your next door neighbor. Because of the stigma around that, these people are in their houses, going into places on their own and overdosing. What this training does is it will allow anybody who comes across them wherever they are to save their life. About 6 months ago, not even 6 months ago, there was an actual death on the Shishelt Nation lands of one of their young girls. She was in her 20s. They recently went door to door through their whole community and had everybody get trained on how to provide this and have signs in their windows so that if somebody needs help, they can do that. So we're going to look at what we can do with our staff, because our staff are out and about in the community. And I'd encourage anybody else who could get training on this to get the training and have these kits available to you. What else do I want to talk about from the district? I also met with, our new staff sergeant, Poppy Hallam. She brought her boss and his boss here to meet with me. They're meeting with us up and down the coast, asking what our concerns are, how we were relating with her. I think she's doing a fabulous job. And they were pleased to hear that, we like what she's up to. This afternoon, we got together with staff and did some further look at our strategic planning. And next week, a number of us are going to Parksville to the Local Government Leadership Academy Elected Officials Seminar. There are 2 streams there, one for new elected officials and one for returning. So it's looking at giving us some information on how to be better at this job, because it takes something. So I think that's all I'll talk about for the district. I'm going to talk about the regional district a bit. Lots of meetings there in the last while. The Councillor Toth referred to the one about the groundwater investigation. That was the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting of January 24th. There's a big report on there. You can also go to the water page on the regional district agenda and find the consultant's information. I was pleased to find that there were a number of people from Shishelt actually in the gallery when this report was presented. Some of the people who have been very vocal around the issues we have with water and wanted to see that something was happening. At the end of the presentation and at the end of our questions and the decisions that we made there, they actually came up to us and said, thank you. We see that you're actually moving things forward. So that was nice to hear. There were 4 sites proposed for wells. It was recommended at that time that Grey Creek not proceed just because there's no water in it in the summer when we need it. The board chose to move forward with a well field at Church Road, and that's a contained aquifer. It's good water flow and a recharge rate. There is a well at Dusty Road that actually has more water, and there are some concerns about the fact that it's close to Lehigh and potential contamination there. So that one, and there's another one further up Shishelt Inlet Road that has very good water as well. So while they're going to move forward with the Church Road, they're not going to abandon the others. We've requested that they look at those 2 as well and see if there's ways to actually bring those on board as well to see if they're viable. The report on the reservoirs is going to come forward at the February 21st infrastructure meeting. So 2 weeks from now. We had the initial policing committee and transportation committee meetings. And at that transportation committee meeting, we requested that the transportation master plan be brought forward for review and discussion. So we all know that there's that master plan out there. We want to bring it forward, look at it. Is it still viable? Is there something that needs to be done with that? Or can we just take that and start dealing with some of that stuff? In there is the bypass, for example. So we're going to look at those kinds of things. Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting, January 31st. We had dry floor users for the two arenas come and present. We have ice users, we have dry floor users. They both want both facilities all the time. So we have to try and figure out how do we make this happen. So this year what we're looking at doing is maintaining ice in one of the arenas till April 30th. And we requested that staff come back with options for fall ice and what the season would look like for next year. We want to give the users the certainty around next year and what their schedules can look like so they can do some planning. Up to this point, it's been this time of year when ice has kind of been allocated and they don't really know what's happening next year. So we're looking at a year ahead. One of the issues, we could not do year-round ice this year. We do not have sufficient water. That hasn't been dealt with yet. As well, in the Sechelt Arena, the chiller has to be replaced this year. They were looking at replacing it because it was getting fatigued. They were anticipating that it's at the end of its life. Because of the deaths that happened with ammonia in that one arena, they've actually had to upgrade to a different type of chiller, and that's going to take 12 weeks to do the changeover. So there will be 12 weeks when the Sechelt Arena needs to be down to replace that equipment. There was also a report on the recreation facility capital funding. So I think it was in 2016, 15, 16, somewhere in there, where there was a life cycle study done on all of the capital facilities with regards to recreation on the Sunshine Coast. And then they came forward with what the capital needed to be for each year to maintain the facilities at the level they needed to be at. And they quantified it critical, not necessarily critical, nice to have, whatever, three or four different categories. At that point, the board chose to only fund critical needs. What they found is that over time now, some of these critical needs are rising in cost. So we're going to need to revisit how much is being set aside each year to maintain these facilities. And then, as Councillor Lamb indicated, at the regional district, we were in budget meetings for Monday and Tuesday. The first meeting was on operational, some capital items. One of the things you'll be happy to know was included was video streaming at the regional district. They're also looking at the staffing around the water, given that water sourcing, for example, once we start bringing all of these other pieces on, we've got the wells, we've got regular Chapman, we've got reservoirs potentially, we're going to need a few more staff to manage and maintain all of that. Then on Tuesday, we had presentations made by the Sechelt Library and other community groups. And not all requests were approved. The board asked for more clarification on a number of items, so some of those will be coming back in March. So, spent a lot of time at the regional district the last while, and back there tomorrow. All right, so let's move on to item 12.1. I have to get back into my agenda. This is a release of resolutions from closed meeting, and I'll look for a recommendation to move as presented on page 256. Moved and seconded. This is that Ian Hall, Development Planning Manager, be appointed as the District of Sechelt's approving officer, and that Joanne Frank, Corporate Officer, be appointed as Deputy Approving Officer. All those in favor? Thank you. Council correspondence. Move receipt. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Any follow-up from this at this point? I think it's pretty straightforward. And move to receipt the RCMP statistics. Moved and seconded. All in favor? I'll just mention that at the policing meeting, the staff sergeant indicated that they're looking at reworking this information into a different format so that it's clearer for everybody. For example, do we really know what CDSA is? Right? Or provincial statutes, etc. So they're looking at changing that so we can actually understand what the call-outs are that they're doing. All right, any other items that need to be brought forward? Motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you very much. And questions? Let's start with Sean first. Sean, do you have any questions? No, I don't. Thank you very much.